Hello and welcome to Absolutely Not. My name is Kay Stroll. My pronouns are they, she, he. You can learn more about me at my website, www.kstroll.com. Real quick, if you appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit the Support the Mission page of my website. There are several options to choose from to support my work, so please choose one. The keywords for this episode are white supremacy, internalization, and savior complex. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and compare them to the definitions that you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. This episode is sponsored by Headspace. Headspace has one mission: to improve the health and happiness of the world through meditation, sleep, stress, and mindfulness. Find out more about Headspace at the link in the show notes. Today's episode is titled White Supremacy in Good Spaces. And there's big, heavy quotation marks around good spaces, but we'll get into it. And I'm excited to talk about it today with my amazing special guest, Leah Goodridge, she, her. Leah is an educator, I cannot say this word, litigator with over a decade of experience in community empowerment, housing rights, and racial justice. Currently, she serves as the managing attorney for housing policy at Mobilization for Justice. There, she leads housing policy efforts and a team of attorneys which provide legal representation to tenants in court proceedings. She identifies as a Black woman. Leah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to start by saying that I have 3 birds and that's them in the background, and we'll hear them during this interview. So whenever I get all amped up about white supremacy, they're back there chirping and singing. So we're parakeets, and that one is a canary who's singing right now. So yeah. Okay. It's funny. I think the sound of my voice, especially if it's like amped up, they feel like I'm singing or something, and so they start getting all wild up.
You know, you're like the second person I've heard that from. I talked to a potential client the other day, and they had a dog who was like, "Oh, they can tell that I'm about to end the meeting because I changed the octave of my voice." So the dog was like, "Okay, let's go. Like, let's leave."
Yeah.
Animals.
Yeah, pets are very perceptive. But at least animals are very perceptive.
Right. But at least your birds are perceptive. And I hope that they're keeping you out of spaces that are not safe for you. Maybe they're able to do that, sense safeness in spaces.
You know, it's funny when I'm in a Zoom meeting and I realize that they're going really loud. I realize that it's too much, that either I'm yelling or someone's yelling, and then I'm like, okay, see. And so then it's kind of like like I might not realize it, and I think they can sense it, and then they start getting really loud, and then I'm like, oh, okay, this is popping off. It's funny. It's interesting, but yeah. And because when I'm quiet and there's nothing going on, they don't say anything. It's dead silence. But that's part of my safe space.
Damn, let me get some birds. Like let me get some birds, because apparently I need a better alarm system, because sometimes I'm in meetings and with potential clients, and I'm like, oh, that went very well. Just to 3 months later or 4 months later, like, I should have saw that. I really should have saw that. Have you ever been in meetings where you at 3 months, 4 months down the line, you've been like, I definitely should have saw that, or I could have saw that?
I have 2 responses. And so one response I used to have a long time ago, and I still do to some degree, is I freeze. Like if something happens in a meeting and I feel like someone's disrespecting me, I'm kind of moving away from saying the term microaggression. See, I was about to say it, but just plain old racism, misogynoir. used to freeze because I would often question and say, well, is it that deep? And then what I would do is I would wait till after the incident passed, like after the meeting, and then go to another colleague and another Black colleague, relay the experience and go, okay, so is it like, am I tripping? What's going on? And I think a lot of Black folks do that because we are trained and taught to let things slide. And so because of that, there's a double consciousness of like, well, is it really that deep? You know, is this enough for me to actually go back and say something? So I would freeze in the meeting, in part because of not fully trusting myself that it was disrespectful or it was racism. And then the second part of that is, even if I was aware, kind of really tone policing myself about how I would react, because we all know that there is a double standard to professionalism. You know, if you have a white colleague, I'm a lawyer, a white opposing counsel who gets out of order, chances are not much is going to happen to them in ways of accountability. But if we do the same thing, meaning any Black person, any person of color, well, not any, but most people of color, it's going to be perceived as unprofessional. And so I would stop myself and freeze and constantly have these conversations about, well, I don't want to look a certain way. I wrote this essay about professionalism, and ever since then, I've stopped that. And I call people out in the meetings. I don't care anymore. And, you know, I've also been practicing for 10 years, a little over 10 years as an attorney. So I also should just, you know, say that I do have a little bit of seniority, a little bit, but, you know, I'm advanced in my career. But all of that to say, I think my one regret is not doing this earlier, you know, not putting these boundaries down earlier.
I love how honest you are being in this conversation. Like you just said that you have been practicing for 10 years and only just now or recently you have started setting these boundaries and being honest about what you're feeling in these spaces. One of the things you mentioned is you no longer using the term microaggression. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, you know, it's not a microaggression to me. Things that we are deeming as a microaggression aren't really microaggressions. Who is it a microaggression to? It's not a microaggression if someone gets my name wrong and I've been working with them for years. It's not a microaggression if someone confuses me with the other Black person. That is pretty deep and pretty macro to me. And so I started challenging who is determining exactly what is micro. I'll tell you one thing. I had to attend a like one of those mandatory, not diversity, but sort of like it wasn't even anti-racism training, it was like liability training, basically. From, you know, lawyers from a law firm came in and they were from the defense side, not defense side, employer side. And they basically gave the training of like the do's and don'ts. And it was really interesting because they went through sexual harassment and gender-based harassment. And they were like, this is discrimination. And then I had raised my hand and I said, you know, a lot of this goes on in housing court. Did you hear them? Getting amped up. So a lot of this goes on in housing court and it's racism. And they were like, well, you know, race, that's more like a small, you know. And so I ever since then, I mean, it really made me wonder, like, really? So you can, and even the law is, what they were saying was not even correct legally, because even through the law, it's not a small, you know, a sort of like, they said a slight. I said, no. If there's discrimination based on race in the workplace, that's just equally as a liability as gender-based harassment. But, you know, for them, they considered it something that is just like a knit on the arm that you kind of just have to, you know, deal with, endure. And for me, it wasn't. It's not. And so I really changed my perception about who is determining what is pain, basically, and what is violence in the workplace.
Sheesh, like that. That makes me it made me immediately think about the book, which is a terrible book, please don't read it, The Body Keeps Score.
Oh,
And
everyone cites this book.
yeah, don't fucking read that book.
Everyone cites
It is
no.
not for it's not. But
Okay, all right.
but the body does keep score. Even if a white person is telling you, "Oh, that's a nick," like the my body is not feeling it as a nick. It is feeling it as a gunch. It is, oh, okay. I really don't want to use that type of violence in this conversation. But I think about the law and how it is very much a bare minimum point. A lot of laws are very bare minimum. So if you are truly creating safe spaces, if you're truly creating inclusive spaces for specifically Black people, you have to do more than the bare minimum, more than the law. Have you ever had to let people know that hey, you're quite frankly not even reaching the bare minimum right now?
Yes. um, you know, so since we're talking about being in do-gooder spaces and good spaces, I think that this is actually a very prevalent dynamic in do-gooder spaces. Basically, for some people, the work is somewhat of a cover for their own biases and racism. And so they don't do much. When you are able to say, oh, well, I do this work, I have a Black client, so I can't be racist, that's not that different from saying I have a Black friend, I can't be racist. That's a little bit of an upgrade, and you're just replacing it, right? And so it's the same ideology of using proximity to people of color as a shield, from one's own internal biases and racism, and how they exact violence against people of color in the workplace. And so I think in a lot of ways, one might even say that sometimes people are attracted to this field, particularly because of the dynamic of having, nonprofits. And we're talking about not even just nonprofits. It really is it could be some government agencies. It could even be journalists. I mean, it could be a wide array of things, but the key that holds them together is most of the time you are working for the public, and that is a very diverse group. It's a lot, mostly marginalized groups, mostly people of color. And so in many ways, for some, that's a comforting dynamic, right? That's not a shift in someone's mentality, to be a white person and to say have a Black patient that they're helping. In many ways, you are still the person who is the decision maker. You're still the person who holds the most power in that dynamic. It's still a dynamic that, if you wanted it to be, it very much could be white savior, right? Very much into white savior. You're helping someone, and that person is relying on you for help. So I think in many ways, the work itself doesn't, people rely on the work to say, well, I'm not racist. But the work itself can actually just be another manifestation of very racist beliefs, where you get to see, and then this is where I think people don't get, where you really get to see how someone truly thinks about the communities they serve is actually how they treat their coworkers, right? And so your coworkers don't have to answer to you. Your coworkers are not your patients, your boss, your Black boss, your Latina boss is not your patient. And so how you treat them is much more of an accurate indicator about how you truly think about the communities you serve, because you don't have any power over them. They're your equals. And sometimes, they have power over you. And so this is where I think this comes out a lot, because some people are not ready to have that disrupted dynamic, and so they bring the client advocate, client nonprofit advocate dynamic, the savior with the person that they're saving, to their colleagues, and sort of they're like, I'm speaking up for you, I'm speaking for you, I'm helping you, even though they don't need to do that. And I think it's because a lot of people are not ready to shed themselves of that white savior dynamic.
Ooh, somebody somewhere, some Becky somewhere is listening to this conversation and hearing for the first time that their good work or the good space that they're created or the good work that they're presenting to the world through themselves is not enough. Like the internal work needs to be done, the work where you're disseminating power from which you gain from your own skin color, which you gain from your social status, all of that needs to be done. What I wrote down is working for the public. Why is that people's first go to when they're trying to do good work? And I know you mentioned because it gets you in correlation with people who are marginalized, but why don't they do the internal work first?
I mean, that's why I say for some, I mean, this is obviously isn't everyone, right? But for some, it is just a cover, you know, it really is just the work is really just a cover. There are some people who work in these fields and they literally have a diverse workplace, but they only make friends with other white do-gooders, right? They only go to lunch with other white do-gooders. They only see other white people as the experts to go and ask substantive questions to. And maybe for the emotional labor, they might ask, you know, a woman of color, you know, to gossip or whatever, but to see as an expert. And so that's another way how this comes out too, right? That's another way how white supremacy comes out in these spaces as well. You really have to take a look at who are you leaning on as the expert in a substantive area? Who are you talking to? Who are your social circles at work? And in a lot of these spaces, and this is something I see, experience, and hear often, people just replicate. People replicate that show Friends and they bring it to, you know, no, I mean, people replicate this sort of like, you can be in the most diverse space and still create a white enclave.
Mhm.
And I think that people don't understand that just because you are serving clients and you work in that space, the fact that you are specifically carving out a white space and making it so is actually incredibly violent.
Mhm.
It's incredibly violent.
And as you've just described, extremely difficult to do. So you're going out of your way to do that. You're in a diverse workspace that has everything you need to be inclusive, to create safe spaces, to find experts who are not the same race as you. And you are choosing to create this like small island of whiteness to stay in a position of power. That's wild. That is very wild.
I said, look, I just met someone at like a networking thing, and they're white, they live in Harlem, and they said they lived there for a couple of years. They don't have any black friends. They don't have, you know, that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, it is entirely possible to immerse yourself in a very diverse space and still bring the supremacy with you, in the sense of, and you have to work hard to do it, like you're saying. You have to actually intentionally do it. And I don't think that people realize. I think people just think, oh, I'm just being friends with who I am comfortable with, or oh, I'm just asking who I'm comfortable with for advice on this substantive issue about our area of expertise, or oh, I'm just going to who I think is a leader. But you do have to intentionally work at it. And I want to talk a little bit about intentionality. One of the things I don't like about mainstream DEI is that oftentimes it starts out with this message about how, you know, assume everyone is in good faith, and you know, it sort of paints white folks as sort of just aloof and not aware and ignorant. And I don't think that that's true of everyone. I think that there are many people who have been made aware, and choose to particularly work and exact in these violent spaces, and exact violence like this, create these sort of white spaces in do-gooder spaces, regardless of the fact that there are countless anti-racism sessions. There are countless, this has been called out numerous times. And so it really, at some point, I do think that we need to acknowledge that it actually isn't helpful to keep having anti-racism training and DEI that is a cover for white supremacy as well, because we do need to start saying, this isn't ignorance, right? This isn't about how people are not aware. People are aware, they just know that they, for the time being in that particular space are going to get away with it. There's nothing that's going to happen. It's fine. People have called it out, but so what? And I think that if there was more accountability created, that's the only way that that's going to get disrupted. The other way, the preferable way is just to not hire these types of people in these spaces. I think, well, I think I was trying to really, articulate, get my thoughts clear about this, but you can't really, right, have a radical shift and a radical change in things when you have the people like I've just described in power, because they're not actually interested in disrupting anything. So if you work, I work in legal services, but I'm talking about the do-gooder space generally. Let's say you work at, a youth empowerment place, right? There's nothing that's really going to fundamentally change. Is someone going to advocate for reparations? These are more radical things. And those are the types of initiatives and ideas that are not going to even come to mind, because that person is not invested or isn't even thinking about radically shifting it, because they're not doing it with themselves in the work. And so because of that, sometimes a lot of the culture in these places end up being that it's just about keeping the train running. And part of keeping the train running is just keeping the system the way it is. And in order to radically shift it and disrupt it, you need people who want to do that, who want to disrupt the system. And I think that it's really difficult. I think if your nucleus, right? If at the nucleus of a person is to well, I'm here, I'm doing this work and it's surface work, because of course I'm not going to treat my colleagues well, my people of color in the workplace, and I like this dynamic of the client because I don't really want to change it. It's comfortable for me because someone's relying on me. I'm the person in power. Well, is that person really going to want to empower that client? Are they really going to want to empower their colleagues of color who may not have as loud of an impact or as loud of a voice? Probably not. The only way that they would want to do so, of course, is when they're in the driver's seat, white savior role,
I love all of the language that you're using. I love that you called aggressions that have to do with race or that have to do with gender acts of violence, because that's what they are. I love that you're talking about the train that's running and whoever's driving the train. Leah, when was the last time you were on a train and you realized, I have to get the fuck off this train? This is my stop. I would like to leave the train.
I think writing the essay was a game changer for me. The catalyst for writing it is I had a host of different experiences where I said, I've had enough. It was after George Floyd, and I am a giver. I'm a natural giver. And so that doesn't bode well for any Black person, especially Black women in the workplace, because a lot of people tend to, anyone that you ask right now, who was the person who was speaking the loudest in June 2020 about, okay, you want to talk about George Floyd, what about pay equity? What about, it's going to be a Black person and probably Black woman, right? And so I think for me, what changed for me is I was that person, and I was often the person speaking up the loudest, speaking up when other people were afraid to. And you have to realize that, of course, people reap the benefits of you speaking up, but then, you know, people are always fine reaping the benefits because, again, you're playing a supporting role, like the movies. You're the Black best friend, right? You're still working for them. But let you take a leadership role, and all of a sudden that disrupts things, and people aren't happy. I took a leadership role, and I think I realized that I was doing a lot of looking out for years for other people. I constantly came to work and was like, oh my God, this is happening. I got to speak up, because I was looking out for other people. And then when I had my own anxiety attacks after the murder of George Floyd, who was looking out for me? Who was looking out for me? I was looking out for myself, and I had to have a conversation with myself. And this was, I spent months being unable to do work in the same way as pre-pandemic, but specifically after that murder, it really impacted me. And it was hard. Me and a lot of my Black friends, we would just be on the phone during the day, like, girl, you okay? Yeah. Because we were like, I can't do where I feel like I'm traumatized, you know? And I think for me, I definitely had a moment of where I said, you know what? I have to move differently. I can't be this person who is constantly speaking up. I actually had a number of experiences where I was disrespected, violently disrespected by white folks, and different as well. And it really changed for me. I sort of was like, okay, I'm done with being the person that is constantly speaking up and sort of like caretaking and, being in this leadership role, because I'm being disrespected. And so I need to take care of myself. And so now I need to put my efforts and energy into people who deserve it, and people who will value my energy and efforts. And so that's what I've been doing. At the end of the day, like I said, again, if you're not willing to do the internal work to understand the power dynamics that you bring to the table, then like the stuff I've been talking about in professional racial, like this just, people aren't going to be ready to hear it. So it's been a difficult road, but I'm glad I got off the bus. I had to stop, another thing, and I will tell this to any people of color. You have to draw boundaries with people too. Once someone, and this is what I had to teach myself because I was operating very differently before. Let someone disrespect you one time, and that's it. Don't do the like, oh, let's talk it out. Because I was doing a lot of the, let's go in the office, let's talk about, let's go. And I had to realize a lot of these folks, it wasn't ignorance. It wasn't ignorance. There was no like, oh, I just don't understand. I grew up in Salt Lake City. No, there wasn't ignorance. They knew. And I was wasting my time and energy. I mean, there's a quote by Toni Morrison about the function of racism is to serve as a distraction, to take up your energy. And I was wasting a lot of my Black girl magic time and energy on people and trying to do these like shadow work and background work and talking to people. And I could have been out there writing articles and doing interviews. And so I could have been professionally developing myself instead of worrying about other people and trying to sort of like be this racial justice mammy. And I had to have a conversation with myself that I'm not going to do this anymore. And so some people, I'm not going to pick up the phone. There's a huge boundary. You disrespected me, it's going to be one time. And so it's over, it's done. You know what you did, you know, like there's no like, oh, I didn't know. Yeah, no, it's done. You know, there's no key, there's just, do you need a file? That's it. And it's, you know, but I'm not doing 3 strikes, you're out. And I think for any person of color, I really think that we need to adopt that creed of stop giving people chances, stop, you know, look, one time, let it be one time and one time only. And that's it. That's it.
I truly appreciate that last nugget because a lot of us are doing well, let's pull them to the side. Let's figure it out. Maybe they haven't had the anti-bias training yet. Maybe they don't know what unconscious bias is. It is 2023. Someone else, another Black person was like, we don't know. It's on the news. It's on Instagram. It's on LinkedIn. It is everywhere at this point. Ignorance is not bliss. Nowhere, no how, nowhere. 3 strikes is done. What I love is that
sorry. I was just gonna say, I think another thing that I learned is some people enjoy, right? Some people enjoy that they know they're taking up your energy and they enjoy that you're spending, because again, you're literally centering them, right? You're spending all this energy like, oh my God, let's do an anti. Yeah, no, listen, someone disrespected me on email. And I was like, yeah, I checked them. And then they came back with well, let's do anti-racism training together. And I was like, yeah, no. And this is the last time that I'm going to email you. Future emails will be ignored. Goodbye. Like, I'm not spending energy. And then I just moved along with my work. What I would have done a couple of years ago is I would have called a colleague, forwarded the emails to the colleague. Do you think I was too rough? You know, should I have said it a different way? What should I do now? And then I probably would have done the training and then I would report it back to the colleague. We did that. All of that is a waste of time. I could have been on CNN. I could have been on MSNBC. I could have been writing another law review article. I could have been, you know, like all of that is a waste of time. And it doesn't benefit me. It may benefit this person. They might learn, but you know, it doesn't benefit me at all. Right. But it does center that person, does make them feel like I'm spending so much time on them. They're getting my energy. And so I had to say, you know, I'm just going to let you know one good time. Don't fuck with me. In email, copied other people. So everyone was clear as well. And then that was it. Moving along. You know, I'm not going to spend my energy. And then what I have been doing for the last year, especially, is when these incidents happen, I actually I force myself to get a bag an interview or get on a panel or something. Like I give myself a project so that I could take my name, I could take my energy away from it so that I have something else to focus on. So what happened after that is as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, now I don't want to be, you know, I just don't even want to be bothered with this. So now I'm going to contact the magazine to see if I could get featured. And I did. And now I'm gonna, you know, so I started, you know, doing this sort of like, okay, after these incidents happen, I need to refocus my energy into myself. Maybe I'll do things that I would never think of doing, like email essence or email, you know, sort of like a high reaching star thing. But whatever it isn't necessarily something to give myself more work. It's to showcase and highlight my work. It's something that's fun. Like speaking on a panel or doing this interview or being featured in a magazine, but basically marketing myself and putting energy into me. Because it's also a subliminal way of letting me know I'm that girl. I'm that girl. I don't have time for this. I don't have time. I'm not going to waste time on stupidness, you know, 5 years time, 2 years time. I won't even remember this, but you know, so why am I going to, or I might, but I also need to train myself to deprioritize certain people. You know what I mean? Like deprioritize incidents and people. You're not going to take up space in my life. You're not important. What's important to me is me and my work. It was hard, but I have to say it is very freeing because when you get in a space of where you're it for you and you know what you bring to the table, people of color, and this is my target audience, you know, when you get to a space where you really recognize your worth and you were it for you, it's actually hard to kind of return back to whatever space you were in before. So what happens is whatever colleagues you were talking to before that would be telling you play the game, it's hard to kind of go back in that space. It's hard because you're like, play the game for what? Like, what play the game for what? This is what I bring to the table. I'm an equal. Why am I acting like as if I'm, of service to someone else who's a colleague? For what? Why are we running around like this is a plantation? No, I'm not going to do that. Scared of who? I think you just become this is what's happened to me. I can only speak about what's happened to me. You just become in a wildly different headspace, wildly different and freeing of where you're like, I am it. I'm it. I bring this to the table. Someone may try to, engage in violence and talk down to me or whatever. And all it's going to do is, all they're going to do is, this is what happens now. All they're going to do is embarrass themselves because I'm going to tell them off and, let them know. And most of the times they do these things publicly. So I return the favor and publicly let them know I'm not the one. And then I move on and then I do a great opportunity. So, I think my biggest regret, as I was hinting to before, is that I didn't do this sooner and I didn't have this realization sooner. But, live and learn. But it is freeing because I was just to be open and vulnerable. I am a big mental health advocate, like proponent of having a therapist, and I have had seen therapists for years. But I have to tell you, when you go through these experiences, I mean, basically, like all of my therapy time, or not all, but a lot of it would be just spent helping me navigate basically workplace oppression. And now, very little of it. I don't even, the only thing I talk about right now is like all the good stuff going on. And I think it's because I myself have have taken the power, like I think to some degree, to some small degree, you have to give people the power too, right? To some small degree. And so I think I've taken the power away by just being like, okay, you're acting silly. Now you look stupid because I told you off. And now I'm gonna like go do a bomb interview for Forbes. Like, okay, bye. Like, what did that do? You didn't accomplish anything. I don't feel small like you intended. You made yourself look stupid because I checked you. And I didn't waste any time on you. Now, I forced myself to go and do a great interview or something else that's career launching. So what did you do other than embarrass yourself and burn a bridge? Because you didn't do anything to me. And I think my attitude before was constantly questioning, constantly talking to other colleagues, trying to psychoanalyze, did I do something? Could I have done something wrong? Just basically not having a strong internal compass and not having a strong, and not trusting your gut to say, yeah, this was disrespectful. It was. And not relying on I hate the phrase, it is what it is in the workplace, because that's so people sort of say it as like, oh yeah, it is, but yeah, anytime I hear someone saying that, I sort of like, I'm not going to lie. I'm like, all right, there's going to be some distance between us. Because no, because people like to say it like as if it's saying something. And in actuality, a lot of people who use this phrase in the workplace are status quo people. There are people who were like, here's the status quo. It is what it is. What can you do? Meanwhile, some of the people who have uttered these phrases are people who have the power to make changes, or people who, mind you, again, I'm an attorney and I'm a social justice attorney. So people saying it is what it is, to me, is ridiculous. It's like, we're social justice, we're movement lawyers. So it's never going to be, it is what it is. The same way that we fight for our clients, you can fight in your workplace, you can fight for yourself. You can do it. So that's different for me.
I love that so much. And while you were describing all this, it just made me like picture jumping through hoops. Like if you don't partake in jumping through hoops anymore, then you don't have to practice for it. Then you don't have to strategize like, oh, what kind of hoop is this? Is it a small one? Maybe I should bend my body this way. I don't jump through hoops no more. My body cannot do that anymore. I don't partake. I love that so much. So the people who are listening to this and are thinking about hanging their hoops up, maybe they don't want to practice, maybe they don't want to stretch anymore, and are refusing or are deciding to refuse to play supporting characters anymore in their own damn lives. What would be the top 3 tips you would share with them about making the steps forward?
Take a step back and assess who it is you're talking to, and who's giving you advice. I'm just going to be flat right. Like, I can't talk to any relatives about, because, this is a lot of my friends, we talk about this, like a lot of our relatives, because you're the first, maybe the first lawyer, first, to go to college, a lot of it is always going to hinge on you're lucky to be there. So you could be like, John came in and spat in my face, and he'll be like, wow, I can't believe they did that. And then like, it'll always circle back to, but you got to keep that job. So it's like, assess who it is you're talking to and who is giving you advice, and assess the type of advice you're being given, because everyone's endurance and tolerance for abuse is different, and make sure that yours is very, very low. There are some people who have a very high tolerance for toxic behavior and abuse and wear it like a badge of honor. I worked with, so I've heard this, right? I worked with so-and-so, executive director, and they were mean. And, I worked through it, and I worked with her for 10 years. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a badge of honor. It's not, okay, that's not a badge of honor, let it be a badge of honor where you saw the sign and you left, that to me is the type of advice that I want to take from people. So I think I have taken stock about who I'm around, and who is giving me advice, and who I'm asking, because you have to ask people for advice, who I'm asking for advice, and actually what I'm doing with my day. Because the other part of it isn't just about who you're talking to, but what are you talking about? Because for me, a lot of it was, I was spending a good part of my day trying to navigate the workplace by talking about what's going on with other colleagues and trying to like keep abreast about what's going on. But all of this was what I thought was workplace survival, whether it was workplace gossip, whatever. The point is, you're trying to like navigate and trying to control whatever you can. But at the end of the day, let's talk about what projects you're going to do, what boss moves you're going to make. You know what I mean? Like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about you, and more talk about what's going on in the workplace. And I think you really need to take a stock of what it is you're spending your time during the day doing, who it is you're talking to, what it is you're talking about, because ideally you should have a lot more time for you, right? A lot more spending time with yourself. And I think this is easier for me because I'm an only child, but a lot, less time talking to colleagues, because the more time career-wise you spend with yourself, the more time you get to know yourself and what you like. You know what I mean? I'm very social, but I mean, there's only so much you can do when you're doing socially where you truly figure out yourself. So yeah, the one is assessing who you're talking to, and 2 is assessing what you're doing, and 3, I would say to have try to find so I'm trying to describe, but basically, when I wrote professionalism as a racial construct, that just came out as like you know, a sort of like, I went to UCLA Law School. They reached out to me, the law review, and said, hey, do you want to write something for us? And I was like, oh, okay, I'll think about it. And then, you know, I was like, oh, I'm going to write about this. And then it sort of, and then it turned into this sort of like much larger thing. But for me, it was very therapeutic. And so I touched on it before, but basically find a way to turn your rage into creativity, if that makes any sense. So if you are enraged and you like writing, find a way to write about it. Find a way to write an op-ed. Find a way to do a panel about it. And you can make it about the work. You know what I mean? You can make it about, you know, you can make it about substantively the work, like if you have clients, or you can make it like what I did about the overall, like the field itself. But find a way to turn your rage into creativity. Because I think for me, those were screams on paper. Those were me, you know, literally raging on paper, and people heard them and related to them. So I think finding an outlet, and not necessarily something outside of work, I think it's really important for you to do it as part of your job, because it is very empowering.
Because there's value to it. There's value to everything that you had to go through. Like, not you giving up all of your energy just not to get something back. Like, if I've learned anything through this conversation, is once somebody takes something from me, I'm going to give myself something even bigger, a bigger panel, a bigger opportunity, a bigger article. Like this is something I will take for the rest of my life. And I'm sure anyone who's listening to this will as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
I think it's really important to think big, go big or go home. I think for me, like I shared, when I have had these incidents, and you know, listen, I've emailed Oprah, like, you know, like I'm like, okay, you know what? Now I'm gonna email Obama. I'm gonna email. Like, I just think that I just put my energy into, you know, basically focusing on myself, and it has really helped me to think about who I am and what I bring to the table, and it is, and that in of itself has been really enlightening for me about my own power and my own value. And it makes it so that after some time, no one can take it away from you. You know what I mean? Like, no one can take it away from you. You know, you are who you are, and people can like it or leave it. And that's where I can say it is what it is.
That's the only time y'all can say it. Thank you so much, Leah, for being so inspiring in this conversation. To anyone who is listening to this, keep setting those boundaries and saying absolutely not to anything unaligned. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.